In this video, I'm going to show you how I finish up these 3 corner cabinets, but to make the build make a little bit more sense, I'm going to run through some measurements. All of my top rails are going to be 2 inches thick, and all of my bottom rails are going to be 1.5 inches. These dimensions were decided by myself and the customer. Wherever this unit hits an opening, next to this will be the stove. It's only going to be 1 inch, and I leave myself like an 1/8 inch bit of play on the side for that. So I didn't have a really thick stile on the side. So same thing where this is the dishwashers on the other side of this. My doors, the rails and stiles are all 2 inches. Once again, aesthetic choices the customer and I decided on. The toe kicks are 4 3/4 inches. They're added separately, and the front of this overhangs that by 3/4 inch. So technically, it's only a 4-inch toe kick. This middle stile where I'm next to the Lazy Susan, you'll see why, but it's going to be wider than the rest, which you can't really tell. And all of my reveals on these Inset cabinets are a heavy 1.1 inch. I made them a heavy 1.1 inch because all of this stuff is going to get multiple coats of primer, multiple coats of paint, and that will actually add thickness to it. So you want it a little heavy. So before I made the toe kicks, what I did was start working on the stiles for the Lazy Susan. I had watched a couple videos on how to mount Lazy Susans because I had heard that they're difficult, and I'm happy I did, because in the instructions for these units, which came from Revishelf, they're awful, terrible. Really disappointed with the directions, but I watched a video that said especially if you're doing an Inset Lazy Susan with fixed doors, you have to have a taper on the side of your stiles, otherwise the doors will not open. So before I did my toe kicks, I wanted to get the spacing on my upper cabinets right. So I just went through and ripped a bunch of 2-inch material, because as you saw, most of my material is going to be 2 inches wide, and I had a stack of it now I could work off of. So I have my cabinets placed with my spacing, and I kind of mocked up a piece onto that Lazy Susan. It's just temporarily set in place. You can see as you spin the Lazy Susan, the problem is that piece is going to be cheated to the inside of the cabinet. So that's going to be the issue with the face frame. If it doesn't have that bit cut out in the back, it won't open. You'll see it's hitting it. So that was the issue I had to resolve. And the original rails and stiles I had that were 2 inches, they didn't overhang the cabinet side of the Lazy Susan enough for that cut. So I had 2-inch ones there, and like I said, I had to beef them up. I cheated my stiles to the inside of both of the cabinets, so there's no overlay on the sink side cabinet or the drawer side cabinet, and this is what that finished piece looks like. I'll show you how I cut that later in the video, but I wanted to show you doing it now because, like I said, I got these 3 cabinets perfectly spaced before starting the toe kicks, because I wanted the toe kicks to run continuously, so I needed to figure out the math for that. Once I had those rails, those stiles set up, I could start my toe kicks. You see I just drew a chalk line on the top side of the Lazy Susan cabinet. Once the countertops are on these, you're never going to see these tops again, so I could draw on top of them. Basically, like most things I do in my shop, I'm overbuilding these. I'm using rabbets and dados to join all these. I'm basically just cutting the pieces and building as I go. The customer and I had not decided how we were going to address covering the toe kick. We might have just painted it or left it because it couldn't be left pre-finished. We ended up putting molding on the front of it so it covers the whole thing, but building it, I wanted it to be continuous in case we decided not to put molding on it. Like I said, the toe kick is 4 inches and 3/4, so I just took a bunch of scrap ply, ripped a bunch of pieces into 4 3/4, and then you could see as I'm building it, I could just cut these down to size. I have the radial arm saw set up with my dado stack, so I could cut my pieces, mark where I need my rabbets or my dados, and then just build as I go. So you can see the front of this overlaps halfway onto the gap between the cabinets, so that bottom will be continuous. If you're not planning on adding molding and you're just going to paint this, this is a great way to do it because I had no gaps in it. So then the backer, Same thing, I just lined up all of my pieces. I'm not really going by any sort of math or special spacing. I just wanted big heavy duty toe kicks on these. These cabinets are quite heavy, especially the corner cabinet, and I wanted plenty of contact between the cabinet and the toe kick and the cabinet and the floor. On top of the fact you're going to be putting a very heavy piece of stone on this, so you want them to be substantial. Now before I glued these together, I did put some rabbets on the top side of some of my pieces, and that is how I'm going to connect them. The glue I'm using does not stick to this. Someone in the comments last week said there's glue that will stick, but at this point I'm using the glue that I have. So the reason for cutting the rabbets like this is so that I have bare wood to bare wood contact, and the glue I have will stick. So I just ran it through the table saw, and you can see these are the pieces I'm going to put on there. It will make more sense once you see it in place, and that is how I'm attaching the toe kicks. I'm attaching them from the underside so that when everything's in place, there's not hardware on the inside of the cabinet going through into the toe kick. And then I can just glue everything together. I just use glue and brads to hold all of this stuff in place and build it as I go. So pretty simple stuff. The toe kick, surprisingly, I bought extra plywood for this because I knew I was building quite a few cabinets after this. But the toe kicks, because it is 4 3/4 of an inch, they end up eating up quite a bit of material. So that is something to calculate if you are building these yourself. So this is just putting, I built one section and then the second section, and then I just attached them together. And then you could see these are the pieces that are now going to fit in the rabbets. We're looking at the top side of the toe kick at this point, so it's oriented in the right way. And I could just glue those in place as well, countersink some holes into these, and then the screws will go up through the bottom of those into the cabinets. So that was how I decided to do the toe kicks and how to attach them. And if you've been watching the videos, you know with this corner cabinet, I'm very happy I did detachable toe kicks, because otherwise this one would not have fit in the house. We had to take the toe kick off, and even then it barely fit because these corner cabinets are huge. I threw a 45 in the back just out of some scrap ply, braided it, screwed it in place, and then I could set it on the top. You can see how those spacers now line up with the bottom of the, well, this is the top of the cabinet, it's obviously going to go on the bottom. I'm not going to film it, but I built the other two the exact same way. Much easier because I didn't have to worry about making it as an L, just straight pieces, and these will get attached on the bottom of the drawer boxes as well as the sink. So then, in order to attach these, the easiest way to do it in my shop was I kind of laid everything on its side. I had the chalk lines on the bottom already. It didn't really matter if I turned the top into the bottom, which is what I did for the Lazy Susan cabinet. And I just lined it up with the chalk line, got them so that my spacing was right, and then I could just screw everything into the bottom. Then I could add on the sink cabinet. You can see it's attached with some clamps on the side. Attach that toe kick as well, and then I could throw the cabinet on top of the corner cabinet and attach that toe kick as well. So like I've been saying this whole build, very doable process for a DIYer. Small spaces, you can work with them. It's just mostly what happens is you just spend more time doing stuff, moving things around in order to get everything to fit. So then once I had the toe kicks on, I could then flip all these back to the way I had them, and I could start working on adding all of my face frames. So there is the sink cabinet, my corner cabinet, and my drawer bank, and you can see the bottom is a continuous toe kick. So for adding the face frames, if you watched the last video, you know I have an integrated spline on the cabinet. So there's basically a tongue on all the front side of my cabinets. I could put a groove in my face frame material, and that is how it attaches. That's the way I prefer to do it. And everything will tack in place nicely. I always go through and make sure I have my dado stack set up, but once I have the spacing accurate, I could just send a bunch of my pieces through and just attach them. If I was doing a kitchen again, I would probably still do the integrated spline, but I would build my face frames off of the cabinet, square everything up perfectly, and then attach them onto the splines. I sort of adapted this way of building it as I go, because I used to work in a much smaller space and pieces had to come on and off. I just got used to doing it. But the proper, or the more traditional way to do it, is to make the full face frame and then attach it to the cabinet. And for a project this big, I probably would choose to do that next time. So that would be something I would change. So once I had all of my styles on, I went through and did all of my rails. For people that are watching this and don't know technical terminology, styles are going to be your vertical parts of your cabinets. It's also the vertical parts of your face frame, your doors on your cabinets, and then the rails are going to be your horizontals. Same thing for face frames, same things for your doors and your drawer fronts. So then once I had the styles in place, I go through and put on my rails, and that's just so that the styles are one continuous piece, they aren't broken up. And then that is what the face frame looks like. Like I said, with that integrated spline, everything pops in place pretty easily. The Lazy Susan styles are not permanently attached. That is the one plus side to the way that I do it instead of a full face frame, which is, like I said, one of the reasons I do it. So those corner styles of the Lazy Susan will pop off, and that is how I transport the cabinets. To install this, it does come with instructions and templates to line up all of your holes. This is just setting the hardware in place so I could start working on the doors. There's basically a bracket for the base, a bracket for the top. You use the templates to install them. Then you could put the pie pieces in place, set up your vertical mount, which is a little finicky. I've adjusted this Lazy Susan probably about 20 times in the shop and about 30 times on site. It was little adjustments would push your doors to the side or to the back or to the front, and with inset doors that was the problem with that setup. So once I had that in place, I could go and take my rough measurements for all of my door fronts and my doors. So the Lazy Susan I'm making as big as the opening, and I'll cut it down, and then the rest of my pieces, same thing. I'm going to scribe them all, so I basically measure the opening of my frame, and for the cabinets, for the kitchen cabinet where it's 2, I'll measure it and divide it in 2, and I'll rough cut all of my pieces. So that was my measurement page. I think I'm making 8 doors essentially. I'm going to call the drawer fronts and the doors the same thing. So once again, this is all out of poplar. It's still from that 2-inch poplar I ripped at the beginning of this video. And I'm going to be putting a 1/4-inch groove down the middle, which I'm doing with the dado stack. My inset panels for this are 1/4-inch MDF. I started using 1/4-inch MDF because it's a true 1/4-inch. Plywood nowadays, you go buy a 1/4-inch plywood. It's never a 1/4-inch. It's more like 3/32, and it's not consistent through the panel. It's a huge pain. I don't love MDF, but it's going to be a true 1/4-inch, and it'll be a true 1/4-inch through the whole panel. My problem with those is I can't find a full sheet of 1/4-inch MDF available at stores near me, so I have to buy the handy panels, which they mark up the price on them so poorly. It's just not super cost effective, which is frustrating. But I kind of bit the bullet for this job, and it made life a lot easier because that true dimension's so nice. So once I just run off my pieces through the table saw and I pre-cut them roughly to size, just because it's easier to send shorter pieces through the dado stack than longer ones, they end up more accurate. I set up for adding the tongue, which will go in those grooves, and I'm going to do that on the radial arm saw. So that's how I'm cutting them. Now, like I said, I have my dimensions, I have my widths and my heights. My styles are already cut to size. I don't have to worry about those. The rails are what I'm going to have to cut, and I have to account for that groove, which is about 3/4 of an inch. So you can see I marked where that groove ends on my pieces. I have my width set up at 8.5, what I need. I can measure between my 2 marks and know I have to cut down my piece to 6 inches. So one of my dimensions I always cut true to size, and then traditionally the rails are the ones that I'm going to cut down and add the tongue to, those are the ones I leave long, and as you saw, I cut them out on the chop saw, and then I could add that tongue on the radial arm saw. It's just a stop with the dado stack in there. You don't have to do a dado stack in here, but it's much faster than doing just the single 1/8 inch blade. And with that stop in place, I could cut these, and then you'll see all of my pieces will now fit together. So I now have my exterior frame for all of my panels. At this point, I could just measure my inside dimensions, add the thickness of that groove, which is about 3/4 and 3/4, so it's about 1.5 inches. I add to both dimensions the width and the height of that perimeter. I could cut down those that 1/4 inch material and put them in the inserts, and that's what everything looks like in place. This is, like I said, just cutting down those inserts and then popping them in. So the Lazy Susan, it's a little hard to see, but I made both doors the same size, and then you'll see how I attach them. Otherwise, if you make one longer than the other, you have to worry about making a style longer than the other, so you don't have a short style and a long style. It gets a little confusing. I made them the same size, and I'm just going to miter them together. For the doors, I could go through and glue everything together. Pretty simple stuff. I only add glue to the frame. You don't want to get a lot of glue on the MDF because it's supposed to float in that frame. I can measure my diagonals. If they're a little off, I just kick the long side to the short side. It's usually just about 1/16 of an inch or so. And once these two measurements of your diagonals line up, usually means your door is square. I could put some clamps on them and let them set. So for the drawer boxes, I'm making them out of hard maple. I sometimes make these out of plywood, but maple does look nicer. I leave that decision up to the customers. Another issue is I can't find a great source of thinner maple, so I usually have to buy 3/4 of an inch, and I trim it down because I'm using the Blum undermount slides that are for thinner material. And the way I like to attach these is with dovetails. So the dovetail is going to be 3/8 of an inch extra in the front and 3/8 of an inch extra in the back. So if I'm using a 15-inch drawer box slide from Blum, you're supposed to make the box a true 15 inches. In order to calculate the sides, I just subtract that 3/4, so it'll be 14 1/4. I could cut all of my pieces down beforehand and then use that jig to put dovetails on all of my corners. I used to put rabbets in the back of my drawer boxes because dovetails on all the corners is a little overkill, but if I already have the jig out and I'm already cutting them, it's really not any extra time to put dovetails on the back instead of taking the time to add rabbets and rabbet the back of them. So I have dovetails on all 4 corners, and these are my simple drawer boxes. I mark the bottom of these because, like I said, I'm using Blum undermount drawer slides, so you have to have a 1/2 inch on the bottom, and then I'm using plywood as my inside base. So a 1/2 inch up, I put about a 1/4 inch groove for my ply, and that's just a groove I'm going to put on the bottom of all of my drawer boxes so my panel can slide into place. Now the company I got the pre-finished ply from has pre-finished 1/4 inch ply, so I got that for the cabinets as well, so I didn't have to worry about finishing the bottom of those. Same process as the frame of the doors. I measure the inside of it. I account for the material going into that groove on the bottom, so it's going to be plus about 1 inch on all of my sides. I could cut that down and then glue these together. Same principle. I'm really only gluing the frame together, putting that piece in the middle because you want that to be able to float, and then I could flip these over and just kind of slowly add all of my pieces. The nice thing about these dovetails on all 4 sides is because if you make them accurately enough, usually these boxes are pretty much square. So I am going to measure for diagonal, but they're very rarely out of square because of how solid the joinery is. And then I could just put some clamps on these and let them dry. So these are going to be my drawer boxes. For the Blum undermount slides, you need slots in the back. There's a jig you can get to do this, but I just kind of roughly mark it and use a trim bit in order to remove a little notch in the back. I don't worry about it being super accurate to size. And then I have these mounted in my drawer box. I kind of slide them in place and tap them, and then that will show me because there's little fins in the back of those slides that have to go into the cabinet. It's one of the adjustments. So by hammering it with your hand, it marks where to drill that. Instead of buying the jig, I could drill the holes and then slide these in place. If you want to learn a little bit more about how to make drawer boxes, I have, I think, 2 or 3 videos on my channel designated just to drawer boxes. So I am going through this a little quickly. If you want to see more in depth how I build them, I'll try and remember to put links in the description of those. And then I could just add the Blum clips in the front, which I thought I filmed, but I didn't. They just screw into the front of the drawer cabinet, and then I could slide these in place. I like these undermount slides because I've been making them drawer boxes for them for a while, so I know the math at this point, and I do find them more forgiving than side mount slides. So at this point I could start cutting the reveals on all of my cabinets, and you could see basically what I did was I made them a little oversized. I'm going to use an 1/8 inch bit of material to calculate a reveal and then trim them down. I actually posted a video on TikTok showing this. I had a ton of people criticizing this process, and they did it because I'm assuming they are coming from shops with a lot more tools than I have. I'm not even using a jointer on this project. And some of these cabinets, even though they're square, that doesn't mean the plywood is square the whole length of the cabinet. So I like to scribe them to get them perfect fits, but people that work in commercial shops or have nicer tools are going to be able to make sure their face frames and their cabinets are perfectly square, and then they can make the doors to fit. That is technically, quote unquote, the proper way to do it. I scribe them. I'm not going to be shamed in describing them. In my opinion, they turn out more accurate. You could see I could cut this as a square line right now. There'll be a little bit of undulation. Personally, I spot that very quickly. I used to make doors for a contractor at my old shop, and one time I went into one of his jobs and he had me make them to size, and the reveals were terrible because he didn't have square frames. So that's the way I do it, but like I said, it was kind of funny. I had a bunch of people telling me it was wrong. So then for the inside of the hinges, and these are just Blum Inset hinges, I like to just prop these in place, which is the plus side to not having a top on this cabinet. I can mark where they're going to go, and then that is what the sink cabinet looks like. Pretty simple. Like I said, I cut all the reveals on there. Once again, I have a video on the channel showing you exactly how I cut reveals on these door panels. It's sometimes a longer process, so I'll put a link in the description to that because I'm going through it pretty quickly in this because this is already a pretty long video. For the Lazy Susan, like I said, I decided to miter the 2 edges to join them so that in the center they'll meet perfectly, and I could kind of mock them up in place. This was tough because if the door is pushed a little bit forward or a little bit back, the reveals are automatically off. So at this point was when, in the beginning of the video, you saw an end product. This is where I trimmed down my stiles in order to get them to fit with the Lazy Susan doors. So you could see I just trimmed down a little bit in the back, and that now makes it so that the doors will open. So when I glued these together, I glued them together with just some epoxy. And when I had them in place, it looked like, because I made that miter cut, they were a little small. So you could see, if you look really closely between the 2 doors, I added a spline because I didn't think I had enough width to fit it. Ignore that because, as you'll see, they were actually a little too big. So when they're set back in the frame now, because my Lazy Susan is not in a perfect spot, they look like there's a big gap. So when I adjust that Lazy Susan forward, because you can see this inset is too far back. Now, I don't know if I used the template wrong or it wasn't aligned right. It was too far back. When I pushed it forward, now you'll see in a later clip it overlays. But once I had it in place, I went and I scribed the bottom and the top. Same process, 1/8 inch piece of aluminum. I put it on the frame. I mark that line, and then I'm just going to cut this down with a miter gauge. You can't see it, but I am using a miter gauge in order to follow that line and get that perfect scribe. And then it's also easy to mess with this with the stiles not attached, which is why I'm happy I didn't attach them. I could put it in that frame perfectly, and that is how it fits in there. So then, like I said, even though in the last clip it looked like there was a big gap, once I got this oriented to the front, you could see because I added that middle spline, now my doors are oversized. It's not a big deal. I was going to have to add the reveals to the side anyway, but this was my problem with that Lazy Susan. It was just a pain. The physics of it is annoying, and if you get off just a hair, it throws everything else off, because you're not just working with one dimension, you're working with two dimensions, then you're also working with the hardware inside the cabinet. So you could see I scribed my sides, put everything back in place, and at least for the time being this was working pretty well. For the sink cabinet, I had a little bit of material I added to the top that will act as a stop for the doors. And then once again, the Lazy Susan, at this point I had readjusted the inside hardware a million times at this point, a 1/16 of an inch that way, a 1/16 of an inch that way. I think I finally got it right, so I marked where the pie cabinets were, and then I just kind of tack this in place from the front, and then I could screw it in from the back side. I had to make adjustments to this even on site. Like I said, for beginners, I'm going to recommend not using that style of Lazy Susan. And then this is essentially what those cabinets look like, all of them set in place. The Lazy Susan at this point is fully functional. You could see it screwed in from the inside as well. In next week's video, I'll start tackling another whole set of cabinets. At this point, these ones I delivered on site.